On December 26, 2024, a photograph appeared on Chinese social media that made every defense analyst in Washington stop what they were doing. It showed a fighter jet flying over Chengdu, except this wasn't a fighter jet anyone had seen before. No tail, diamond-shaped fuselage, flying in broad daylight over a major city like it was the most natural thing in the world. Within 72 hours, the Pentagon confirmed what everyone was thinking. China had just unveiled what appeared to be the world's first sixth-generation fighter aircraft. They'd done it without warning, without a press conference, without the typical decade of leaked concept art and carefully staged rollouts. They just flew it. And if you're wondering why that matters, consider this. The United States has spent the last 20 years assuming it had an unassailable lead in military aviation. That assumption just became significantly more expensive. Here's what makes this moment different from every other China builds new weapon story you've scrolled past. For the entire post-World War II era, air superiority has been the foundation of American military doctrine. If you control the skies, you control the battlefield. It's not complicated. And since the 1970s, the U.S. has maintained that control through technological dominance so overwhelming that most conflicts were decided before they began. The F-22 Raptor entered service in 2005, nearly 20 years ago. It's still considered the most capable air superiority fighter ever built. China couldn't come close to matching it, until, apparently, they decided to skip a generation entirely. This isn't about patriotism or threat inflation. This is about money, industrial capacity, and the uncomfortable mathematics of what happens when your competitor stops playing catch-up and starts playing a different game. Because here's the thing nobody's saying out loud. The United States hasn't actually fielded a new fighter jet design in almost 2 decades. The F-35, depending on how you count, has been in development since the 1990s. It entered service in 2015, already controversial, already over budget, already the most expensive weapons program in human history. China just showed the world a sixth-generation fighter that apparently works. The U.S. sixth-generation program, still theoretical, still classified, still years away from anything resembling a prototype anyone outside a secure facility has seen. So the question isn't whether China's ahead. The question is how we got here, what sixth generation actually means, and whether the numbers behind this race make any sense at all. Let's start with definitions, because sixth-generation fighter sounds like marketing until you understand what it actually implies. Fighter generations aren't official classifications. They're shorthand used by analysts, engineers, and defense journalists to categorize capability jumps. First generation, jets that could fly fast. Second generation, jets with missiles. Third generation, jets with better missiles and radar. You get the idea. Fifth-generation fighters, the current pinnacle, are defined by stealth, sensor fusion, and supercruise. The F-22 and F-35 are fifth-gen. So is China's J-20, though most Western analysts will tell you it's not quite in the same league. Sixth generation is murkier. There's no agreed-upon checklist, but the general consensus includes next-level stealth, AI-assisted systems, optional manned or unmanned operation, distributed sensors, laser weapons, longer range, and the ability to command drone wingmen. That last part is critical. The future of air combat, according to every serious strategist, isn't about individual aircraft. It's about networked systems. A single manned fighter controlling a swarm of semi-autonomous drones, each carrying sensors or weapons, creating a distributed kill web that's nearly impossible to counter. That's the theory. What China showed in December looked like it could do some or all of that. Tailless design suggests extreme stealth optimization. The shape implies high-altitude, long-range performance. Analysts spotted what might be intake configurations designed for sustained supersonic flight without afterburners. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Nobody knows if it actually works. China released a photo, then another, then video of it flying, then Nothing. No specifications, no test data, no production timeline, just an aircraft that exists, flying over Chengdu, while the world tries to reverse engineer its capabilities from grainy footage. And the U.S. response? Careful, measured statements about how they're confident in their programs and on track with their own sixth-generation development, which tells you absolutely nothing. The U.S. Air Force calls its sixth-generation program NGAD, Next Generation Air Dominance. It's been in development since at least 2015, possibly earlier. The budget for it is classified, but estimates put it somewhere north of $20 billion already spent. In 2020, the Air Force made a cryptic announcement. They'd already flown a full-scale prototype, built it in record time using digital engineering and agile development, revolutionary approach, game-changing speed. They haven't shown a single photograph. That's not unusual for classified programs. What is usual is the radio silence that followed. In 2023, the Air Force started making noises about NGAD being too expensive. In 2024, they paused the program to review requirements and costs. Translation? They're not sure they can afford it. See, the F-35 was supposed to cost around $50 million per aircraft. It currently costs somewhere between $80 and $100 million, depending on the variant and how you calculate the expenses. It's operationally effective, eventually, but it took years of software updates and fixes to get there. NGAD was projected to cost $200 to $300 million per aircraft, each one. The Air Force wanted at least 200 of them. That's $60 billion minimum, just for the planes themselves, not including development, not including maintenance, not including the drone wingmen each NGAD fighter is supposed to control. In an environment where the defense budget is politically toxic and every dollar is fought over, that's a hard sell. So they paused it. Meanwhile, China flew their sixth-gen prototype over a city of 16 million people. Let's talk about how China approaches aviation differently, because this isn't just about technology, it's about industrial strategy and what happens when you're willing to accept different trade-offs. China doesn't need to project power globally. They need to control their region. That's a fundamentally different design problem. American fighters are built to operate anywhere on Earth. They need range to cross oceans, they need carrier compatibility, they need interoperability with allied nations, they need to be maintained in austere conditions thousands of miles from home. Chinese fighters need to dominate the airspace within a few thousand kilometers of China's coast. Different mission, different priorities. This means China can optimize for specific scenarios. They can accept shorter range if it means better performance in the Taiwan Strait. They can skip certain interoperability requirements. They can design for a threat environment they know precisely because it's their own neighborhood. And they can do it faster and cheaper. Chinese aviation industry isn't burdened by the same defense contractor dynamics that define American procurement. When the U.S. develops a fighter, it goes through Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Northrop Grumman, companies with shareholders, profit margins, legacy systems, lobbying arms, and intricate relationships with Congress. Chinese aviation industry is state-owned. AVIC, the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, doesn't answer to shareholders, it answers to the party. When the government decides it wants a sixth-generation fighter, AVIC doesn't negotiate a cost-plus contract, it builds the thing. This has downsides. Innovation can be stifled, efficiency isn't guaranteed, corruption exists, but speed they have. The J-20, China's fifth-gen fighter, went from first prototype to operational service in about a decade. The F-35 took about twice that long. If China's sixth-gen fighter follows a similar timeline and they're already flying prototypes, they could have operational aircraft by the early 2030s. The U.S. NGAD program, assuming it gets unpaused and funded, is targeting the mid-2030s at best. Now, here's where we inject some skepticism, because aviation history is littered with impressive prototypes that never became effective weapons.
Flying a prototype is not the same as fielding an operational aircraft. There's an enormous gap between, "Look, it flies," and "This is a combat-ready system that can be mass-produced, maintained, and integrated into a force structure." The Soviet Union flew some incredible prototypes during the Cold War, planes that broke records, pushed boundaries, looked unstoppable. Most of them never entered meaningful service or were deployed in numbers so small that they didn't matter. China has gotten better at this. The J-20 is real, it's operational, and it's being produced in significant numbers. But it's also had issues, engine problems primarily. For years, they couldn't produce engines that matched Western performance, so they used Russian ones. They've reportedly solved that now, but it took time. A sixth-gen fighter is exponentially more complex. The integration challenges alone are staggering. You're not just building an airframe, you're building a networked battle
management system that has to work flawlessly in contested electromagnetic environments while coordinating with drones and ground systems and doing it all at supersonic speeds. The U.S. has been trying to perfect this with the F-35 for 15 years. It's mostly there now, but the road was brutal. Can China do it faster? Maybe. They've demonstrated impressive technical maturation in recent years, but maybe is doing a lot of work in that sentence. And then there's the question of how much of what China showed is real versus theater. In December 2024, China was dealing with economic headwinds, diplomatic isolation over trade policies, and domestic questions about military effectiveness. Unveiling a sixth-gen fighter, even if it's not fully operational, sends a message to Taiwan, to Japan, to the United States, to their own population. Strategic ambiguity cuts both ways. Let's zoom out to the financial reality underpinning all of this, because that's where the story gets really uncomfortable. The United States spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. In 2024, the defense budget was around $880 billion. China's official defense budget is approximately $230 billion, though most analysts believe the real number is higher, maybe $300 billion or more when you account for off-book spending. Even at $300 billion, that's a third of what the U.S. spends. So how is China competitive? Labor costs. A Chinese engineer or factory worker costs a fraction of their American equivalent. A Chinese aircraft assembly facility can be built for less. When your entire supply chain is domestic and labor is cheap, you get more capability per dollar. But there's a deeper issue. The U.S. defense budget is spread impossibly thin. The Army needs new tanks, the Navy needs new ships, the Air Force needs new tankers, new bombers, new ICBMs, and new fighters. Space Force needs satellites, Cyber Command needs infrastructure, veterans need health care, bases need maintenance. Every service is fighting for the same pot of money, and that pot, while enormous, is finite. China can focus. If the party decides air superiority is the priority, resources flow there. No congressional hearings, no competing lobbies, no need to justify why the Air Force gets funding instead of the Navy. The NGAD pause? That's what happens when you're trying to fund everything at once and the math stops working. Each NGAD fighter at $300 million means that's $300 million not going to something else. The Air Force has to choose sixth-gen fighters or keeping existing fleets operational. Both is increasingly unaffordable. China doesn't have the same global commitments. They're not maintaining bases in 80 countries. They're not funding NATO. They're not guaranteeing freedom of navigation across multiple oceans. They're building weapons designed to deny American access to their region. That's cheaper. So, who's actually ahead? If you define ahead as has the most advanced operational fighters right now, the U.S. still wins. The F-22 and F-35 are proven combat systems. China's sixth gen is a prototype. If you defined ahead as will have the most advanced fighters in 10 years, the answer is genuinely unclear.
If you define ahead as can afford to keep developing and fielding next-generation aircraft indefinitely, that's where things get complicated. Because the real race isn't technological, it's economic and industrial. The United States has better technology, more experience, better pilots, better training, better logistics. But maintaining that edge requires continuous investment at levels that are politically and fiscally challenging. China has momentum. They're narrowing gaps faster than most people expected. Their industrial base is massive and growing. Their willingness to make long-term investments without worrying about election cycles gives them strategic patience. And here's the uncomfortable part. Air superiority is binary. You either have it or you don't. Second place doesn't get you much. If China fields a 6th-gen fighter that's 80% as good as the American version, but they can build twice as many for the same price, who wins? If the US builds the perfect fighter, but can only afford 50 of them, do those 50 matter when China has 300 good-enough fighters backed by 1,000 drones? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the actual calculus Pentagon strategists are running right now. And maybe that's the point China is making. Not that they've definitively leapfrogged the US, but that the gap is closing and the cost of staying ahead is becoming prohibitive. Every dollar the US spends on NGAD is a dollar it can't spend elsewhere. Every strategic choice has an opportunity cost. China knows this. They're not trying to match the US everywhere. They're trying to make American dominance too expensive to maintain. It's working. The 6th-gen fighter reveal wasn't just about aviation. It was about signaling that China can compete in the most advanced, most expensive, most technologically demanding domain of military power. And if they can compete there, what does that mean for everything else? The US is already stretched. The Navy can't build ships fast enough. The Army's modernization programs are behind schedule. The nuclear triad needs recapitalization. Now add a 6th-gen fighter arms race on top. Something has to give. So here's where we are. China flew a 6th-gen fighter. Maybe, probably, we think. The US has a 6th-gen program. Probably, it's paused for budgetary reasons. The defining question of 21st century military competition isn't who has the best technology, it's who can sustain the race long enough to make the technology matter. Right now, the answer is unclear. What is clear is that the assumptions that held for the last 30 years, that American air superiority was permanent, that technological advantage was insurmountable, that competitors would always be playing catch-up, those assumptions are gone. And nobody really knows what comes next. China hasn't published specs on their new fighter. The US hasn't shown its at all. Both sides are developing weapons designed to fight a war everyone hopes never happens, spending resources that could transform economies, building systems so complex that even the people building them aren't entirely sure they'll work as intended. The only certainty is that the bill is coming due. And when it does, someone's going to have to explain why we spent trillions on fighters we can't afford to fight, wars we can't win, in skies we can't control. The race is on. The finish line is unclear. The stakes are existential. And the most advanced fighter in the world is whichever one actually exists when it matters.